Tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Ko Ella Henry tōku ingoa, and I'm here to answer questions you might have about Māori business and why it matters. So, are you curious about the difference between Māori and non-Māori business? Do you want to support Māori businesses but aren't sure how to do that? I'm a professor of entrepreneurship in the business school at Auckland University of Technology, and I'm here to answer your questions about Māori business because this is Māori Business Matters. So here's an interesting question. What are Māori businesses and how are they different from non-Māori businesses? Well, that's about the same as the difference between Māori and non-Māori. We are a unique and distinct culture, the Indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, who have developed a culture over the 1,000 or so years that we've been here, and non-Māori businesses evolved from a different culture. Some of the characteristics of Māori business culturally are that we are essentially an egalitarian society that favours collective and relational leadership, and so that is reflected in the kinds of organisations that we create, which are often flatter and less hierarchical, far more egalitarian, far more informal, and very much family oriented. That is often different to the kinds of businesses that you will find that non-Māori produce, which tend to be more hierarchical, with a stronger division of labour and often more greater emphasis on profit rather than collective well-being. So here's another interesting question. Please explain what tikanga is and why it is important for Māori business. Well, let's take a step back, because tikanga is a word that comes from the word tika. Tika is actually one of the key values of Auckland University of Technology, aroha, tika and pono. And tika means to be right, to be good, to be fair. So tikanga is how we enact goodness and rightness. And traditional Māori culture was predicated not so much on laws and rules and procedures, but on tikanga that helped us to understand how to behave and interact with each other. And that is what we take into our business. So when you first encounter a Māori business, you find that we adopt tikanga like a pōwhiri or a welcome, a traditional welcome. We are more likely to engage and ask you to participate in a karakia, which is not necessarily a specific religion, but more of an invocation that brings together not just the physical, but the metaphysical, the spiritual, because that is as important a part of our well-being as the physical. There are many, many aspects of tikanga, some of which are quite well known in this country. The idea of whānau is very important in a collective society, so whanaungatanga, practicing that, forming kinship bonds with people, kaitiakitanga, which is the tikanga of stewardship, is actually woven into New Zealand legislation around my responsibilities as a steward and a guardian of the environment. Well, this one's interesting, particularly dear to my heart. I've heard about controversies surrounding the ethical production and marketing of Mānuka honey. What's the deal? Well, interestingly, I've just finished co-writing a paper about the way those Aussies stole our word. They are using the word Mānuka to describe their honey. The ancient Māori word and all of the language and understanding that came with it is Mānuka. When we discovered this tree and gave it that name because of its properties, which are absolutely extraordinary, it was a unique Māori gift to this country. And at no point did we gift it to Australia. Here we go, here's another important one. How much does Māori business contribute to the New Zealand economy? As at 2025, the Māori economy is estimated to be $70 billion and to grow to $100 billion by 2030. So that's approximately 18% of New Zealand's 2024 GDP, which is about on par with the Māori population. We're around about 18% of the population. What is important about that statistic is recognising that Māori are punching to our weight. In other words, we are making an equal contribution. We are not a drain on the economy. We are not a problem for the economy. We are contributing to it in a meaningful way. And I think that's an important thing to remember when people look at us and see a stereotype of negativity, because there are so many out there. The reality is Māori contribute, Māori economy contributes, and it does so in a way that validates our identity, our culture and our values. Here's another interesting one. Since their settlements with the Crown, some iwi seem to be powerful, wealthy corporate entities. Ngāi Tahu, Tainui Waikato. What would you say to someone that says iwi business holdings have had an unfair leg up? That's such an interesting point. What we need to remember is, just in the case of Ngāi Tahu, when they agreed under force to sell their land, the contract of the agreement ensured that 1/10 of all the land that they sold would be retained for their ownership in perpetuity. That did not happen. The people of Ngāi Tahu were reduced to absolute penury when this treaty claim was heard. And if, in fact, they had received 10% of the South Island, which they were promised in the treaty sale, then they would be multi-billionaires. But they did not. They received what would barely pay for one small farm. And the fact that over the years, over the 25 years since settlement, they have been able to convert that 160 million into $2 billion worth of goods and services and companies is a testimony to their capacity and strategic leadership. What is important in this example is to also recognise that Ngāi Tahu not only are generating wealth out of that very small recompense, but they are doing it in a way that maximises well-being. So a certain amount of all profits go back to every one of their runaka, which is their tribal entities around the country. Every Ngāi Tahu child that is born automatically is given $1,000 in their KiwiSaver account at birth. These are the ways that this tribe is generating wealth and surplus value and giving it back to their people, because that is the foundation of Māori business. How do we create wealth that becomes intergenerational and solves problems of poverty and social justice that are huge issues in our communities? How can I tell if a business is actually a Māori business or if they're just using Māori as a marketing tool? That is such an interesting point, because there are actually businesses around the country who have used Māori images, Māori culture, Māori history and been caught out about it. Those non-Māori organisations who are prepared to work with Māori communities, Māori advisors, Māori consultants, or even better, Māori partners, are creating really interesting and innovative narratives around their products that are actually distinctive in the international marketplace. So those companies that are not necessarily Māori businesses but are working closely with Māori are, I think, really maximising the benefits of those partnerships. However, those who are just using Māori language and Māori imaging as a marketing tool, woe betide when we find you, young man. Well, here's a great one. I want to support Māori businesses. What's the best way to find Māori businesses near me? Well, we're very fortunate in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We have a national Māori business network. They're called Whāriki, and you can find them online. They run a series of events throughout the year profiling Māori businesses. They are a Māori network, and they allow you to interact with and socialise with Māori business people around the country. So I cannot suggest enough what a great organisation they are. Reach out to them. However, you might be in a small rural community, and if you're brave enough, just rock up to the local marae and introduce yourself. Just say, hey, I'm a business person. I'm interested in knowing more. I'd like to, find out how I can help and be part of this community. Oh, what could non-Māori businesses learn from Māori business? Well, as I've said before, Māori business tends to be founded on Māori values and Māori culture. Those around kinship and community are a really important part of Māori businesses, and I think they should be a really important part of all business. If you are in business anywhere in this country, and you genuinely believe that your business is making a difference, whether it's the smallest business or the biggest business, then you are actually reflecting the same kinds of values, because business for community, business for people, business for sustainability, business that is green, business that is caring, that's what Māori business is. That's what all good business should be. What's my favourite Māori businesses? Well, as far as I'm concerned, they're all my favourites, but I have some particular personal favourites. I've been doing some work of late with a woman by the name of Chelsea Winstanley and her partner Tweedy Waititi. Chelsea was the first Māori woman to be nominated for an Oscar in 2020 as a producer of the internationally renowned film Jojo. Rabbit. Jojo Rabbit. That's what it was. And she came back to New Zealand not long after that and started a business which has been converting Disney cartoons into te reo. So they've done, I think, 5 or 6. Anyway, what I'm saying is there are Māori businesses that are making profits, but also doing really important things in terms of growing our language and learning about our culture and raising our profile on the national and international landscape. So we have people like Peter Lucas, who's the CEO of Te Heku Media from my hometown in the far, far north, Kaitaia, and the work that they've been doing around digital technology and AI had him recognised by Time magazine last year as one of the top 100 AI specialists in the world. So from our humble little origins in the far north, or from coming from Hollywood back to New Zealand, Māori businesses are doing really interesting and innovative things. And if you look more closely at what they're doing, every single one of them is engaged in business that they believe is making a positive difference to who and what we are as New Zealanders. How can the Māori sense of collectivism coexist with the traditional business focus on the bottom line? That's such an important and interesting question. And I have to, because my background is sociology, take a step back here. And the notion of traditional business focus and profitability is less than 500 years in human history. That's how long capitalism existed. We've been on the planet for maybe 10,000 years in this form. And only in the last, cosmologically couple of months have we been obsessed with the bottom line. Humanity, for most of our time in existence, has not been focused on profit before people. Humanity, before we were captured by the notion of profit before people, used to live in sustainable communities where business was there to support and not expropriate those communities. So I think that Māori's sense of collectivism has something to add to that notion of what is the bottom line. For us, the quadruple bottom line is far more important. That of finance, of course, it has to be there, but also cultural, social and environmental bottom lines. And when you factor all of those 4 bottom lines in, you are actually part of business that really matters. Here's another one. Are there other countries that have the equivalent focus on Indigenous business? Are they doing things we could or should learn from? That is absolutely going on around the world. For example, in Australia, Canada, the United States, some parts of Latin America. And actually the common theme in all of those nations is that they are colonised, or they are ex-colonies. They are settler states that had Indigenous populations who have suffered badly under the regime of colonial rule. But in recent decades, in all of those countries, we've seen a huge resurgence in Indigenous identity, Indigenous language and culture revitalisation, and more importantly, Indigenous economic development. And in fact, there are some players in Canada and the United States, some tribal communities that are doing extremely well. What is really interesting is that often they will come to New Zealand to work with Māori because of the fact that we have had such a high profile over the last 50 years in terms of developing language acquisition strategies and business strategies and political strategies that they want to be able to develop in their own nations. So whilst they may be more successful in terms of running business empires, they are also looking at how we can collaborate more effectively. And so it is that the international Indigenous community is growing in its shared vision and shared purpose for how we can not only support our own Indigenous economic development, but also how we can contribute to our colleagues around the world. And that is particularly important at a time when the world is so troubled by issues like climate crises and growing warfare and a range of other things that are separating us as people, and how we as Indigenous communities around the world can present strategies for working more collaboratively and collectively in kinship groups to make real and meaningful change for the future. Well, thanks for all your questions. I hope the information I've shared has been helpful and that you can find more information if you are interested. We're going to provide a series of links to, I think, what are fascinating, important, interesting, open organisations that I know you will find very welcoming, very informative, and will hopefully contribute to this journey that we're on to ensure that Māori business matters.